Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the 706 podcast, brought to you by everyone's favorite video platform, Rumble, where we are sponsored and happy to be beside folks like Glenn Greenwald and others. So catch us on our channel, catch us on our sponsorship, Rumble, the place where it's at. For today's episode, we'll be talking about Stoker, a film from 2013 by Park Chan-wook, sort of inspired somewhat loosely by an Alfred Hitchcock movie called Shadow of a Doubt. Park Chan-wook's film is about a young woman named India Stoker and her mysterious uncle. We'll get to kind of quick opinions in a moment. Let's just go around and introduce ourselves, starting with Kirk.
Hey, all. I'm on Rumble. I'm on Parlor. I'm on Freedom Chat. I'm on Ivermectin Chat. I'm on all those, 16 Chan, 32 Chan. It's good to be here.
Connor.
Hey everybody, I'm Connor. I am now on Rumble. I am on Bumble. I am on Tumble. Come and find me there.
All right, and then Mr. Kalamutsi.
Hello, guys. Unfortunately, I have been banned from Rumble for speaking too much truth. So I'm currently searching for a platform that will have me, and I've been unsuccessful. Also, I'm Tony.
All right, thank you for the intros. I think I'm going to actually do things a bit differently to start off. I'm going to let Tony give his opinion first, because Tony normally has seen all the movies. He's seen them all twice, sometimes thrice, but just has his notes down. He's ready to go. But this time, if I remember right, he had seen Stoker before, but hated it so much because it was an Anthony film. He forgot it completely, and he didn't want to watch it. But I want to get his opinion down. Let's hear what he has to say. Was it memorable? Was it transit? Was it the Book of Henry-esque? What do you think, Tony?
Wow, Anthony. Well, it was kind of in the middle of all those. It was a little bit of every category. I mean, I don't want to say that I disliked this movie, because I did like it. I did like this movie. It definitely, I'll say, first of all, that in terms of other Park Chan-wook movies I've seen Old Boy, which is one of my all-time favorites, and I've seen Sympathy for Lady Vengeance. But of those three, at least from what I can remember of them, this is probably the best directed, the most formally accomplished, most impressive visually. The editing is nuts in this movie. It's got very creative, very funky, very kind of attention-getting editing. There's a ton of really cool cuts. There's a ton of really cool transitions. You see this egg, and there's a slow fade into India's eye. And there's just a lot of cool little moments like that. And the best edited sequence in the movie, or the coolest sequence probably overall, is when, what's her name? The woman who comes to visit the house.
The aunt?
It's Jin.
Yeah, Aunt Jin.
Yeah.
Aunt Jin comes to visit the house. And then she goes to this motel, and Charlie hunts her down and kills her. But it's intercut with three different things going on at once. And it's just the way it's done is it's very elegant. It's very cool. It's very cinematic. And the movie kind of effortlessly is full of just moments like that, of these really subtle and cool, sometimes not so subtle transitions that I liked a lot. And the cinematography also is beautiful. Just the lighting in the house with those really sharp, bright colors. Every frame is very colorful, often very creative. The way the camera movement is done, and sometimes almost a shaky or jarring way, but it nonetheless feels extremely controlled. I feel like that this movie is a masterclass in directing, and it shows an incredible confidence in the storytelling as well, in terms of how it decides to dole out information, its trust in the audience in terms of when to hold back information and when to be ambiguous. You'll see things happening from different perspectives, and we won't really know what really happened, and we have to kind of be patient and sit with it. So I think in general, this is a tremendously confident film and a tremendously well-made film. Where it falls flat for me a little bit is the script, which I don't quite know what to make heads or tails of. And I think ultimately that's why I forgot this movie, is that I think I left it not really knowing how to feel. And that's still basically how I feel. I'd forgotten most of the beats of the plot, aside from there being this kind of creepy uncle character. And I'm with the movie for most of it, in terms of not really knowing what's going on, kind of being intrigued, kind of being drawn in by this kind of tense, almost erotic atmosphere, this very Hitchcockian feel. And then in the last 25% ish of the movie, it kind of just loses me. I don't really know what the characters are doing, why they're doing what they're doing. And the ending in particular, really, I did not understand it. I didn't understand why India made the choice that she did. I'm sure Anthony will very patiently explain what an idiot I am and how blindingly obvious it all is. But yeah, so I don't know if this was my favorite thing, but I do respect it. I respect this movie. So anyway.
Well, no, interesting reaction, Tony. A lot of positives, some negatives. Probably some of it's very understandable, but lucky for all of us, I picked up the Spark Notes and the Pink Monkey book for this movie, and I'll be able to analyze all the themes and symbols as we go forward. But hearing Tony talk, I was also reminded, did we catch everyone's favorite in a very small cameo? Harmony Korine as the substitute or kind of the art teacher. Hearing Tony talk, I was thinking about that, and I forgot that he was in the movie very briefly. But let's go to Kirk.
All right, so I'll try not to do the classic Kirk thing, where I shit on a movie and then I draw it back and I vote it in. So I'll try to be more measured, try to come at this with a balanced approach. So Anthony is capable of some of the shining, rubies that we find in this desolate, isolated landfill of cinema, I guess, that can, often feel sparse and littered with shit. But this one, I think it's weird. It's weird. There's a lot of things to kind of digest here. And I think that I was intrigued by the film. What Tony said resonates with me. I enjoyed the direction. I thought the editing was provocative and at times experimental, sometimes haphazard. Like there's this shot, I think he's digging holes, he being Charlie, Matthew Good, and he's digging some holes to put some like walking stones, flat stones in towards the beginning of the movie. And then there's just this random shot of her dress that's like zoomed in kind of shaky for like 2 seconds. There were a couple of those where I like didn't understand what the point of the shot was, just kind of like random zooms. So maybe they got a little, they were a little bit self-serious at times, which, if you're going to make a movie like this, you kind of have to be, because I really think this movie is light on plot. It's kind of not really that interesting of a story, to be honest. Borders on some like YA themes, which, I think are rather prosaic at times. The idea of growing up, independence, autonomy, coming to terms with vulnerability, assimilating versus accommodating, the sentiments, the flaws and insecurities of the people who raise you, your parents, your grandparents, whatever, your uncles. But at times, it's very interesting as well. So it's hard to say, like, if I were watching this movie of my own accord, I would have turned it off within the first 15 minutes. I was so disinterested. I thought it was rather boring, especially with the whisper start. Like, I don't know. There's something about it that's like, it's like not even A24. It's like A25, right? I don't know if you guys, maybe Connor or Tony, will agree with me. But at the same time, Anthony, I can understand because there is some soul here. There is something to latch onto. Like the development of India is actually quite interesting, and how she kind of comes to terms with this violent, psychotic, sociopathic uncle, and how she sees that reflected in her own yearnings and desires, her own lack of connection, how she's been shoehorned into this role, these schemata that she doesn't necessarily agree with. The line in the beginning, I think you're supposed to take that with you the whole film. It's like, we are not responsible for what we have become, something like that. The influence of our environment. And, obviously at the end, we see the flower wasn't a red flower after all. It was a flower speckled with blood. And so we kind of understand that to mean that, she is a child of violence. At least that's how I see it. Though I'm not too sure. We didn't necessarily see the violent side of her father, which makes me wonder, like, is this a recessive trait? Like, what's going on here? But anyways, there's a lot of really, really shocking scenes, kind of scenes that you could put any Oscar nomination clips, like the montage, like the 20-second clips, that they put in for best editing or whatever, the kid doing snow angels on his younger brother who's buried alive, her masturbating in the shower, thinking about her uncle killing that guy. I mean, I was like, is she gonna start and yep, there she goes. But yeah, she's an interesting character in the sense that she's prickly, she's sullen, she's stubborn, she's acerbic, she's facetious, and yet she's also like, she longs for beauty and connection, I think, and she doesn't have that. You can tell that her mother is just totally emotionally unavailable. Who played by Nicole Kidman, who I think was just kind of a write-off in this film, to be honest. Like, did we really see any of the skills that we've come to associate with Nicole Kidman? I'm not sure. I guess I'll move into the cast. So I think Mia Wasikowska offered a great performance. I don't think Matthew, like when I see Matthew Good, I think of like an ABC Family, like Christmas special. He's got the look of someone who it's hard to take seriously, and Dermot Mulroney to a lesser extent, just these guys who like just look like they should be used car salesmen. And it just, I don't know, there's not much room, but I know it's intentional at the same time, but I can still push against it. Like imagine a Michael Pitt in this role, how much more nuance, how much more depth, right? But as much as I was iffy on the plot, iffy on kind of the pacing, there are some really memorable scenes. My favorite scene, which I thought was objectively the best scene in the film, was the piano scene. And I know there are many, but the one where Charlie sits down with her and she's not playing her same little kind of basic, wasn't a waltz, whatever it was, little melody, and she starts to go, she starts to really start playing something that's beautiful and amazing, and he accompanies her, and it's like, that to me was like the orgasmic experience. That was her, like, metaphorically speaking, and this film is just coated with metaphor. I think that is her kind of losing her virginity in a way, maybe her psychological virginity, I don't know. Anthony, if any of that makes sense, then I hope it does. But I thought it was okay, Anthony. It redeemed itself a little bit from its slow start. I wouldn't watch it again. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to anyone who doesn't absolutely love cinema, because I don't think it's that engaging. But there are moments within it when you watch movies you can just really appreciate, and you're like, that's fucking good. That's really creative. It's really smart. And so I guess that's what I take from it.
Yeah, very interesting reaction, Kirk. You get the sense almost like you wanted something, or you were pulling for something, the way you kind of are throwing out the sort of possible meanings or different items you sort of latched onto. So maybe you'll talk yourself lower or higher as we go along, but we'll get to Connor. Do you hear what others cannot hear, Connor? Do you see what others cannot see? What was your take on India?
I'm sad to say I have an opinion rather similar to my two co-hosts. I mean, what can I say? I mean, what can I say that they haven't said? I would just call attention to one thing. One thing that I really appreciate about this movie is its retrospective and kind of old school quality. Certainly looking back to the past, and reading a little bit up on the movie, doing my obligatory Wikipedia research before we started the episode. I see Hitchcock is cited as a major influence, but it's not what I was thinking of as I was watching. Really, I didn't. Now I can see some of what they mean, but no, what I found much more powerful was a sense of, obviously, kind of gothic horror, and certainly kind of 19th century fiction in general, right? This scenario, this place we're in feels kind of like this, sure, modern, but somehow a kind of a modern version of the 19th century. We have a kind of governess character. We have these kind of plots and the kind of, in itself has this kind of time-honored quality to it. It's kind of time-honored themes, the kind of theme of the evil step-parent and this sort of Electra or Oedipus complex. It was very interesting. That really intrigued me about the movie. And I think that was down to the direction, to all of the camera work, to The costumery I thought was quite interesting. And yeah, so I enjoyed it for that. Now, that being said, I felt there was an aspect of this movie where I came away kind of with a bad taste on it, because I felt it just felt so kind of its time, of 2013. And maybe it wasn't, but let me explain what I mean. It's kind of this combination, this kind of Emily the Strange, kind of this character who kind of, I get this feeling of like YA, this kind of like this girl who no one can understand, who sees past everyone else. And, she's a little bit violent and, this kind of goth concept, right? Which is obviously older than this time period, but then it's combined too with this theme of a certain kind of female emancipation that involves, like killing your lover, the guy who would have sort of dominated you. She herself dominates him, beats him at his own game. And then now she's an empowered kind of, sexy woman, a girl boss, if you will. Right. I mean, that's a way I would caricature it. Obviously, I think we're talking, a little bit early in terms of the kind of the cultural zeitgeist for that sort of thing. And certainly, I don't think these were first on the minds of the director or writers, but I think there's something to that there. And I find it interesting that it comes from this exact year, 2013. But yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued by those things. I felt it didn't quite, land for me, or I didn't quite feel, I felt that the twist about the uncle was rather, I mean, it did surprise me, but obviously what his intentions are from the very beginning. It seems, the story of what happened to her father. You can guess at that from the very beginning. There's not much mystery left. It's just, what will Mia Wasikowska's character herself, get up to? What's she going to do about in this situation? And of course, it's a surprisingly open-minded, view of our take on, the sort of the tradition of avunculo sexuality, which was interesting to see and intrigued me. But no, obviously it's supposed to be, kind of quite horrifying, and it is. But I liked the riskiness, the risk that it took there. So I think I have I have these reservations, but I did enjoy the performances. And, most of all, I noticed along the way, right, all these little, kind of symbolic touches, the spider crawling up her leg, this kind of thing, right, all these things. So I'm ready for class to be in session, and I'm polishing my little apple to give to Anthony here, to be the little teacher's pet. So I'm open to having my mind opened and changed. But overall, I was a little bit, lukewarm on it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I think, okay, so to go through about my own sort of take on it, it's my second time seeing it. I've seen all of Park Chan-wook's films as far as I know. I've always been very cool, though, on The Handmaiden, which is one that people tend to love, especially online. Old Boy, I think, is pretty good, but I'm not as fervorish towards it as a lot of people. Sympathy for Lady Vengeance is what I think it's kind of at. But Stoker, when I first saw it about 4 or 5 years ago, has always kind of resonated with me, actually, for a weird variety of reasons. And I thought at first it was merely the sort of directorial touches, the sort of, at times, overindulgent, stylish moments that almost make you think this is a film every 5 seconds. At times it does seem a little bit too much, but I think there's something else more thematically, which I'll get to in a second, that I like. But first, Mia Wasikowska, total Anthony actress. One thing I like about her is her willingness to take on these kind of strange projects from directors that are almost always not their more acclaimed films, with maybe, Guillermo del Toro, Crimson Peak, David Cronenberg, Map to the Stars, Tim Burton, Alice in Wonderland, and the sequel, the willingness to do the sequel for that good paycheck, and on and on. Oh, she's worked with Mia Hansen-Love pretty recently. So kind of really interesting actress to me. So I love watching anything she does and seeing what kind of movie she's putting her performance in. Thank you, Connor, for bringing up Emily the Strange, which is a reference I have not heard since 2013 and had not come across my mind when watching this movie. But in thinking about this movie, both times I've kind of felt this, is it's not so much the suspense, it's not so much the idea of who these people are, which maybe because I knew Shadow of a Doubt, which also has a character named Uncle Charlie, and doesn't feature someone in India, but features someone with a very similar name to Stoker. With all my mind, it kind of like thought maybe that's the kind of the rug being pulled. Maybe it's a familiarity with some of those kind of Gothic traditions that you're speaking about, Connor, and Certainly, I think there's a way to mirror this movie with like Crimson Peak, not just because of the actress, but because of the sort of isolated home, isolated mansion type feel. But in thinking about this movie in particular, I think the way to think about it is like a lot of Park Chan-wook's films, which is solely from the eye of revenge, and solely from the eye of a revenge that comes from a young woman's point of view, or at least a young person transforming into a woman. I think the key is she sees a dead body in that freezer pretty early on, and she does not call attention to it. I think she knows who Uncle Charlie is from sort of the get-go, or at least from that moment. The second thing to also keep in mind is what really drives her is the idea of secrets, and of course the love for her father. And what I think of the whole movie is really her completion of figuring out who Uncle Charlie is, merely to have the satisfaction of killing him, and which thereby gives her of knowing who she is, which involves a second killing and getting away with it, putting herself into the family. The very idea of secrets being the thing to kind of keep the family together, but also being the thing that could tear it apart. Not knowing who her family is doesn't really protect her because it only gave her the love of a parent, one parent. But all of a sudden, knowing the truth gives her even a more horrifying reaction, which is a sense of responsibility towards the family, a responsibility I think that Kirk was getting to, which is sort of the evilness, the evil nature of maybe kind of defaulting to who you are. And all that's driven by the fact that everything was sheltered from you from the beginning, except for that love of the parent, the love of the father, especially. And I think all those things are kind of playing out in a very interesting way. And I don't think necessarily they're in the script, which is written by Wentworth Miller of Prison Break fame. I think it's one of his like 2 scripts he's ever written. I think not really considered a great screenplay writer, but I think what Park Chan-wook does is imbue it with a sense of symbolism, meaning, changes of the shots to give all this sort of an energy that probably wouldn't otherwise be there, but give India Stoker a very interesting transformation. That's very kind of curious to me, from the moment of the shoes to the moment of the high heels, which is kind of drawn out a little obvious, I think, at times, but very fascinating. And of course, the way to think about this all, at least the way I would put forward, is to think of them, the characters, besides India, as just mere tropes, mere dolls almost, for India to kind of maneuver. The whole house feels like a dollhouse. There's moments when, for some reason, the 2 doors are there. One's closed and the other one's open. Then they kind of reverse and we see one character over the other. I'm thinking of that scene in particular with Nicole Kidman and Matthew Good, as you know, he's essentially about to seduce her into strangling her. So this kind of dollhouse, this nexus of the family, that's kind of a plaything of multiple desires on a Freudian, on a psychoanalytical, on a sexual level. And of course, what I think of as the sexiest non-sex scene I've ever seen is the one moment Kirk also touched upon, which is that piano moment. It's super interesting to me. So anyway, I'll stop there if any of that made sense. But let's start maybe then with Tony's point about the ending, because you said you didn't understand why the characters were acting the way they were. Is it because they seemed out of character for you, or is it just because the characters weren't developed enough for you, or what do you think?
Well, I guess I should have been more specific. I'm talking about I guess, yeah, the last chunk I didn't enjoy it quite as much, but what really threw me off the train was the actual ending where she kills the cop and basically, I guess, accepts her heritage as a killer, accepts her identity as a killer, which in your reading is what the whole movie is kind of built around. But I hadn't remembered that, but watching it tonight was essentially seeing it for the first time, as I hadn't seen it, or I'd forgotten most of it. But it didn't feel inevitable to me. It didn't retroactively make sense. It just felt sort of like, oh, like it surprised me in kind of a bad way. Like I didn't really understand. I didn't see how she had become a killer in the course of the rest of the film. Now, I guess thinking back on it, you have the Alden Ehrenreich character, and she's sort of complicit in his murder when Charlie kills him. And of course, you have the scene in the shower where she's masturbating to the thought of him having been killed, right? So that sort of shows her inching in that direction. But to me, to go from there to killing Uncle Charlie, which I understood, that felt correct because it was essentially her defending her mother. But then to killing the cop completely gratuitously, it felt like such a jump for me, because the Alden Ehrenreich character, or Whip, I guess was his name, he was about to rape her. or was trying to rape her in that moment. So both him and Charlie like have it coming in that moment. The cop, like, he pulls her over for speeding and she jabs him in the neck with the shears. So to me, it just felt like too big of a jump, I guess. And it felt like almost like it was there to be like a striking, shocking moment at the end of the movie rather than being an organic evolution of her character. But I'm sure you can explain why I'm wrong about that.
Well, okay, maybe we should then go back to Han Solo's character, Whip Taylor. Great name, Whip Taylor. Do we really think, though, that like she's going out with him in a sense of like actually pursuing a sort of date? I'm always curious about this. Like, what was your guys' reaction to that? Like, is this someone like, why would we ever think she'd go out and then just be like, oh, like I'm finally going to go on a real date, given what we know about her up until that point? Kirk?
Because she's experimenting. That's what adolescents do. She's outside of herself in that moment, right? Like that's what she even says. Have you ever seen a photograph of yourself when you don't know you're being photographed? And she's dissociated in that moment, but in a healthy way. I think as teenagers, we all have moments where we do things that don't necessarily make sense with our moral code or with our behavioral programming, and we learn from them, either for good or for bad, right? For better or for worse. But I think that we're just talking about that scene, killing the cop. It didn't necessarily see, to me, if I had seen more violence if I had seen her father more, and he was only in one scene towards the end, really, and if I had seen him exhibit some rather scummy behavior, I would have kind of understood what was going on, and it would have made sense for me why then she was killing the cop. And I don't think it necessarily matters. I think you would say this, Anthony, is like, you don't even have to think of her literally killing a cop. Like, it's almost like we take the David Lynch defense in some of these instances where it's like, yeah, it's metaphorical. She's kind of confronting authority in this certain way. But I don't know. I think her mother was kind of an interesting character. It's like her mom wants to have sex with Charlie, right? She wants to kind of move on, and it's unclear whether India kind of resents her for that. But so it kind of also didn't necessarily make sense why she would want to save her mother totally. I don't know. There's some contradictions in here, but I think they're purposeful, and I think they're meant to kind of stimulate thought. And I'll just give another example. Like after that murder, after the Whip murder, right? She's covered in mud, and she heads into this pristine white tiled bathroom, like this pure, this symbol of purity, right? And she's kind of besmirched, or not necessarily besmirched, but like sundered her purity in that sense. And I think that's kind of really cool, those moments. And so it's almost like you're at the Whitney or you're at the Met, and you're like walking and you're like, oh, this is nice. And then you go to the next piece. Oh, this is nice. And you're like seeing a collection of various pieces from the same artist or a similar group of artists. And they don't necessarily make sense tied together as a film, but they are beautiful in and of themselves and evoke a reaction. But yeah, that's I don't have anything other to make sense of the ending. Maybe Connor does. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I like that, honestly, and I'm satisfied with that, honestly, as a kind of metaphorical reading. That yes, that this represents her emancipation and getting into the car that she initially kind of stubbornly refused to get into because it kind of represented this kind of sexuality, represented kind of the pursuit of this man she rejected, obviously for legitimate reasons, but that represented this kind of threatening force of the outside world that kind of interrupts one's childhood and all these things. And then she kind of takes control of that car and then kills the cop. And the cop, it's himself, who I think appeared earlier, to question her about the attack by Whip and what happened to Whip. And so she kind of lied and kind of pretends to be kind of an innocent damsel in that situation. And so it's an interesting kind of reversal. And, I think it's fine. I guess it doesn't quite, I like what Tony says, it doesn't quite make sense on a deep character level, but I don't mind these characters being a bit symbolic, a bit doll-like, as Anthony said, because I think it tells a kind of a psychological story. It's kind of a tale. It's kind of an allegory of some kind. Yeah, I mean, just think, let's remember when she leaves first to go on that date with Whip. I can't quite know exactly what's going through her head, but and I think it's on the table. But of course, it's right after she's seen the two of them together at the piano, which eventually becomes the kind of the symbol of intimacy that she fantasizes about. And I think it's complex because at first, right, we think it's her anger at the replacement of her father by her uncle, but it kind of transforms at the same time into this anxiety that she wants to be her mother in this scenario, right? And finding the kind of surrogate Whip character, the surrogate kind of lover character or father character, or what have you, and then that itself is kind of reversed when the uncle comes and saves her basically. So I think it's I don't know, I like this play of identities and roles, because it's supposed to get at this idea of this kind of again kind of Freudian coming of age moment. But yeah, I guess that's all I have to say. Like I said, it doesn't have to make quite literal biographical sense to me, because these characters are kind of abstractions and sort of characters from a Gothic, from a kind of storybook.
Interesting. Now, well, contrary to how Kirk says I normally go with, or I would typically read maybe things, go with something a little bit more literal, which is to discuss her actual history of why, to me, the ending kind of makes sense. Which is one, to start off with Whip Taylor again, to go there. I never saw that as kind of her trying new things necessarily the way Kirk does, because to me, it's also like what Connor was saying, a play on the relationship that she's seen at the piano between her uncle, or Uncle Charlie, and her mom. But before that, she knows Uncle Charlie's following her everywhere. She has the clues, so she's never actually on her own doing something different. She's being watched, and she's waiting, I think, for that reaction, waiting to see who's there in the darkness, really, and waiting for that to kind of appear. But even before, to think about her kind of life, right? Her mom, who's always been cold, her mom had a good relationship with the dad, or at least says so, only before India was born. So we have another kind of play or theme of kind of usurping or taking over, kind of replacements or doubling sort of effect. But before that, we get India's backstory. What she trained to do all her life as a child was to hunt animals, and to always be calm, cool, and collected in those moments. She said she's someone who could literally watch for hours. It's a sort of weird prey-like description about her. So she goes from hunting animals to inviting a boy, to being violent against him, to then assisting a killing, to then kind of moving on to killing her Uncle Charlie, but really in the moment after the Uncle Charlie hits her mother, kind of is violent towards her and tries to get her to watch another killing. And I think it's kind of key here is that there's not really any other female characters in the narrative besides the mom and the two women who are killed, which are her family members, or her aunt and her caretaker, and then a few of the maids. But she's really into, and the most emotion she really shows, other than her Uncle Charlie towards the end, is with the aunt. She's so excited. She says, "You made the dinner better." She's really kind of interested there. And of course, those are killed. But she's someone who literally only kills men. She goes from Uncle Charlie, then finally killing the other man, which is the sheriff in the story. And I think part of that is a play of how violent the way men in particular really intrude on her fantasy dollhouse and her fantasy world, which is why it's so fascinating to me when the mom says, I can't wait for the world to mess you up, to break you apart, which is kind of a moment. I know, Kirk, you said you didn't really find the character interesting and that it didn't play to Nicole Kidman's strengths. How would you have done that differently? Or what do you think about the mom then?
I didn't see enough contrast. I didn't see enough pain. I saw kind of a doctor's waiting room version of Nicole Kidman, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean? Some soft jazz, some Men's Health. I will say, and before I forget this, I spent probably 65 of the 100 minutes I watched this movie thinking that Charlie was a vampire. Like the real distinct possibility that they were both vampires, hyper senses. I guess the night stuff didn't really make sense, because obviously he was out during the day. I don't know the total like canonical rules for vampires. I guess I should, but I thought there was some sort of creatures or eternal beings. How could he have been talking with these people and then all of a sudden he's at the head of the stairs? How is that possible? He leaves like a trail of dust like on the piano bench. That was kind of strange as well. I don't know.
You watched the credits, right?
No. Oh yeah. Okay, Tony. Funny. Well, I did miss that credit scene in that one film that I recommended, the Michael Pitt film, I Origins. Yes. Yes. That was pretty consequential, but yeah, I don't know. And I guess that kind of colored my reading of the film. Is like Nicole Kidman is like this straight-laced person who's like was married into this family of vampires or of elven people. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I think that speaks to kind of like they really kind of took some liberties with projecting this aura of strength and omniscience for Charlie and his like total domination. He leaves the umbrella at the gate when he knows it's going to rain. He's in the forest, like you said, like he knows he's following her, but he also knows like he knows where that lady's staying, his aunt's staying. He brings her the cell phone. He knows she's going to find the severed head of Mrs. McGarrick in the freezer, so it's kind of like that classic trope of villain knows all. Villain is always, in the right spot at the right time. But yeah, I don't know why she killed him though. I really don't. I don't know. Like, I guess that's your question. It's like, I don't know what her motivation was for killing him at the end. I feel like she should have killed him immediately once she found out that he killed her father. That would have made more sense to me than killing him in reaction to her mom being threatened, who she didn't really seem to have any sort of relationship with. But it must be down to like gender, like you said, like there is an element of this male domination that she was addressing, or she was kind of fighting back against. I don't know.
Well, I think she's learning from him. Anthony points out, she finds out early that he's, what he is essentially, or she might not know that he killed her father, but she has an idea that he's capable of something like that, or that he probably did something bad or has, evil plans in some way. So I guess the whole movie, she's learning from him, and her killing him is her ready to like break free. It's like, I don't want to be your student. I don't want to be your pet or whatever you have in mind for me. I want to be my own adult woman who can go out and jab cops with shears and steal cars. So I think that made sense for me, even if you accept that she wouldn't want to save her mom.
There's also something I think towards that moment, Kirk, where she's also learning from the mom, right? We get that one moment where they're in the kind of the mom's room. The mom says she's about to go to bed, and they actually start sitting together, or the mom starts sitting, and Mia Wasikowska's India is behind her, and she starts brushing her hair, kind of flip on the mother-daughter thing. But they have this moment, right? And even the mom points it out, which is we're both wearing basically the similar night dresses, similar nightgowns. And it's this weird moment, kind of, right, of usurping again, kind of replacing, I think, which has some sort of relevance towards that end, I think, as we go forward. But as we kind of wrap things up till we get to the voting, I do want to ask Connor, our Edward Said scholar, what do you think of the name India? Does it have a purpose? Was it just Wentworth Miller being cool and MFA? Was it just Dana Schwartz vibes going on here? What do we do with the name?
No, I didn't have a great reading of it, but it just felt to me again, we felt like this could have been ripped from a 19th century novel, in that, for instance, we talk about Charlie, Uncle Charlie. Someone says he was in the East. He was working in the gold mines of Borneo or something. Things you can't possibly imagine anyone saying now. So to me, I felt, this became less clear as it went on. For instance, I thought it was almost an almost transit style kind of adaptation of an older book or something like that. I realized quickly that wasn't the case, but because of, for instance, the presence of cell phones and things like this. But no, I'm curious. I am curious what you've thought of, Anthony. I can't quite fasten on a reading right now of that name.
Yeah, it's okay. So now I'm going to go into my post-colonial lecture. No, I actually really don't. I think there's like little pieces like you're pointing to, and there's weird little figments that like hint at this sort of weird colonial disposition. The art the little figurines, which are so East Indian-esque, Indian trading company like, but it's all there. I mean, maybe there's something bigger and maybe there's not. I don't know. I've always been curious by it. And of course, Kirk talked about this actually last week, Stoker, the kind of hint towards, of course, the most famous Stoker, Bram Stoker. So I think, your vampire connection feels probably pertinent. Maybe there's something relevant to it. I don't know. But anyway, we can move towards the voting. I have Cosmopolis vibes going on here. Things aren't looking good. But let's start with Tony.
Sure. And I'll just make one last comment. We talked about the movie's kind of weird, ambiguous setting in terms of its time. And you guys have mentioned the 19th century. No one mentioned the 1950s until they mentioned that she was born in 1994. I thought this movie was set in like the 50s or 60s, from like the mint green paint on the kitchen walls, which you never see these days, to like the Alden Ehrenreich guy. He's almost like a greaser. They go to like a greaser bar with the neon, and she goes to get fries. It's almost like a malt shop. Very interesting. There's like 3 levels of time here. So that's the thing about this movie. That's a good point for summarizing my feelings in the movie, because there's a lot of things like that, like a lot of cool little details. I like a lot of what Anthony said. I particularly like the idea of like the house as a dollhouse, and like everyone has her playthings. And I think that this is a movie that, as I sit with it, like things that were kind of confused me might make a little more sense. But at the end of the day, it's not a movie I was super enthusiastic about. And, that's what rules at the end of the day. So I'm gonna be a soft no, but it was an interesting movie. It was definitely worth seeing again.
All right, we'll keep the sort of order I guess we did at the beginning. So Kirk.
All right, for my final craftful end, I will say that in response to the dollhouse, the idea of the dollhouse. Well, I'm a human. I'm human sized. I can't fit in a dollhouse, and to me, it almost feels like you've got this little miniature teacup, and you can't really put anything of substance in it, but it's beautiful and it's kind of cool to look at, but it doesn't have much utility. And so to me, that's how this film feels. It feels like a collection of bite-sized, doll-sized knickknacks that I don't necessarily have any use for as a human progressing through the world that we're in. There's some nice novelties, but ultimately I felt a little detached and a little jumbled. It felt jumbled. It felt half-baked at times, overbaked in other places, but there were cool things, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful film. Like, if someone asks you, is this beautiful? It's more beautiful than a lot of the films I've seen, recently and long ago. So, I mean, if anything, it intrigues me to go see some of the other work of this director. But I did get the Crimson Peak vibes that you mentioned in your nomination, for sure, though I like Crimson Peak more. So just for its atmosphere, more cohesive as well. So I will say a no, but, I'm happy I watched it ultimately. So.
Okay, and Connor?
Well, just as a parting shot, one last lingering thought. So the idea that, Anthony mentioned this idea of like, for the last idea, like, yes, she's trying to stop, the people, for instance, by killing the sheriff. She's trying to stop like men, for example, from interrupting the dollhouse that she's designed for herself. And I get that at the beginning, right? She is kind of creating her own itself kind of mournful, she's into the idea of mourning, she's reading about Victorian, mourning customs and kind of shaming her mom for not also adopting them. She loves the idea of just unwinding all the clocks, closing all the windows and just lying down in bed and sort of wasting away, like a good, Victorian woman. And I don't know, are we encouraged to kind of find this kind of charming about her? It's a bit corny, I think the movie's position, though, is to say that, we're not supposed to, or it's not good that she actually can build this dollhouse. I think it's always coming down on the side of the right thing to do is to have her be challenged by the entrance of this outsider, right? And only through this encounter with this outsider, with sexuality, with the world of adulthood, she herself become kind of the killer. I mean, maybe it's ultimately a cynical view of this. Maybe it's ultimately saying that this is a bad thing that this ever happened. But somehow I think, to me, the logic of the movie seems to say that this is kind of a necessary development. It seems to try to be encouraging her to get out of this dollhouse. But so that's my kind of parting shot. So I would say that, yeah, I'm not like, I'm not in love with this movie. I think I can't quite, figure out an exact, reading of it. I appreciate it for all of its, again, kind of time-honored themes. It's kind of juicy, kind of academic English class, kind of qualities, which I do not by any means consider a bad thing, as you know. We have these kind of tennis balls that we can lobby about as skilled readers of text and stuff. So I think there's a lot of value in that. I think this movie could speak to certain people, maybe not just not to me. So I'm going to give it a soft yes, a sort of dissenting yes. But I wasn't super fond of it, but I found a lot of things to appreciate about it.
Okay, that's very interesting. I wonder if how Connor, if as he was speaking, would have done the soft yes had he gone second or first. I don't know if I got the little sympathy there, but I'll end with this movie's well loved, guys, by many women across the world. And once again, Tony and Kirk fell to touch into their sort of feminine side, but we could forgive them. We could forgive them next time.
Anthony actually knew that going in, and that's why I know. So
I leaned into that take.
Yeah. All right. So we're moving forward. I'm standing outside in New York. I'm seeing Harley Quinn costumes everywhere. I'm seeing leftover Trump mask just flooding the subway. We're heading into everyone's favorite season, spooky season. So we're going to be nominating 3 Halloween-esque films for my choosing for episode 74 as we count down the time to Cloud Atlas at 75. So who went least recent?
It's either Tony or Connor.
What do you think, Tony?
Well,
Tony.
So Sphere was our last one. Before that,
It's
we did.
Tony.
So it'd be me, I think. Yeah, actually, it would be. I think I'll go first, actually. So I have a horror movie here that I'd thinking about been pitching for a while. This is a movie that actually came out last year that like nobody saw. It was basically just like dumped by the studio, treated very poorly, and it's a movie that is kind of ripe for a cult reappraisal, cult rediscovery. And the people who've seen this movie are very excited about it. People online are chomping at the bit about it.
Are we going to see The Hunt?
No, it's not The Hunt. It's not The Hunt. Lesser known than The Hunt, lesser seen than The Hunt. But this is The Empty Man. And basically, The Empty Man is about a kind of a legend, an urban myth where if you blow into a bottle and say the words, the empty man, you will hear him on the first day, you will see him on the second day, and he will find you on the third day. And this is a movie that is basically, it's about a former detective who has kind of a tragic past. A teenage girl in his town goes missing, and on her mirror in blood, it's written, "The empty man made me do it." Now that setup does not sound very promising at all. But I assure you, this movie goes into some very different directions than you're expecting. It is very dark. It is very unsettling. It is very weird. And part of the reason the studio dumped it is because they didn't know how to sell it exactly. But it is a very cool movie, and I think it would be a good one for us to do. So that's my pitch.
All right. Before we move on, I got to ask, because you used it. When you say the phrase people on the internet, who are these people on the internet and where are they at and what are they saying exactly?
This is Anya Taylor-Joy and Phoebe Bridgers' Twitter accounts. They both were repping this movie. They were paid by 20th Century Fox, and it bombed.
Nice.
Yeah. I'm talking about the film Twitter and Letterboxd bros, broadly speaking. But there you go.
All right. So were we at Connor or Kirk next?
Let's do Connor.
Okay, so as you remember, last time I recommended Monkey Shines after apologizing for my lack of knowledge of the horror genre. And I'm afraid I have something sort of similar to present this time. Now, as I've admitted, while I respect the horror genre, and I've seen a fair few horror films, none of them really, truly excite me, right? Some are interesting, some tickle my fancy, some are, a lot of times I like ones that sort of try to comment on the genre or things like this. So I went through a lot of possibilities. I was thinking, well, another Romero movie, Martin, which is kind of a subversion of a lot of horror stuff. I thought of, okay, a classic that I love, The Thing. but none of these really spoke to me. So instead I'm going to opt for a Halloween-ish movie that I think is one of my favorite movies of all time, one of my true beloved classics, from a director that Anthony knows well, has some history with. I'm talking about Tim Burton's 1994 Ed Wood, which is not a horror film by any stretch of the imagination, but it integrates some horror elements into its cinematic texture. I consider this is about a movie about the sort of B-movie director Ed Wood and kind of the band of misfits that he surrounds himself with, including the filming of Plan 9 from Outer Space and some earlier films, his relationship with Bela Lugosi at the very end of his life. I think this is kind of a perfect film. It's a movie about movies, about the magic of cinema, et cetera, et cetera. And I just think this always holds a place in my heart. I always think about it fondly, and it's just so masterful in its construction of this plot. And it still has, I think, a lot to say, while also being very much of its time. And I won't get into, the whole 90s cultural criticism thing. I know it's a bit played out in our recent episodes, but there's plenty more to talk about aside from that. It's a movie that stands on its own, and I think it's perfect for our podcast. So yeah.
All right. Curious tactic. Connor chose the Halloween / horror genre from like an angle approach. So last but not least, Kirk.
So I guess I'm after Connor's choice. So I'm going to choose Schindler's List. Now, I know what you're thinking, but parts of it actually did happen in October, so it counts. Now, Connor, I resent that tactic. We're supposed to choose bad movies. Monkey Shines got chosen last year. This is going to continue. I'm going to nominate a true psychological horror film. It's called What Lies Beneath, 2000, Michelle Pfeiffer, Harrison Ford, a real banger, the ultimate psychological thriller. This was like pre The Ring. This was in the land of jump scares, right? So the basic conceit is that Michelle Pfeiffer and her husband, just Harrison Ford, send their daughter off to college. They're in a new home in Vermont, kind of bucolic Vermont, and the house seems to be haunted. And it progresses from there. She doesn't understand what's going on. She starts to believe she's losing her mind. It's a very slow burn. But there are moments where I can watch pretty much any horror film and not blink, like, Dawn of the Dead, whatever, Evil Dead, I'm just kind of staring at the screen, just kind of expressionless. But in this film, like, I am looking, like, I'm holding my hands up at my face because it is very tense. It is very atmospheric, and it's no, it's a Zemeckis film. It's no Forrest Gump. It's no whatever, but it does its job, and I think, Anthony, it depends on what you're looking for, but if you are looking for a film that has the spoopies, I think this is a film for you. This is What Lies Beneath. So.
Very interesting. We'll get some rebuttals in a second. I will say I'm a little disappointed that no one picked Don't Look Now, just to see Tony rage quit again. But okay, let's hear some things. I'm pulled in all sorts of directions.
So as for Connor's, now Ed Wood's a good movie. I like Ed Wood, and I'd be fine doing an episode on it at some point. But come on, this is our Halloween episode. That is not a Halloween movie. I'm sorry, it isn't. And I love Monkey Shines. Monkey Shines is one of my favorite movies we've done on the podcast. I was so happy we did it last year, but we can't do Ed Wood for Halloween episode, guys. Come on. What Lies Beneath? I've never seen it. I can't judge it at all. Maybe it's great. I gotta say though, I am a little skeptical about a Robert Zemeckis directed horror movie. I'm a little skeptical. That's all. Maybe I'll poop my pants. Maybe it'll be the scariest thing I've ever seen. I don't know, but I'm not optimistic. My movie, I would say, is truly unsettling. It is a non-traditional horror movie, and I do think that it's a non-traditional recent horror movie that's not quite in like the A24 mold. It's not really, it doesn't feel like Hereditary or Midsummer. It doesn't feel like The Witch. It's its own thing. It's a very distinctive, it's kind of a one-of-a-kind experience. And when I watched it like 2 months ago, I just lost myself in its atmosphere and its depths. And there are moments in the movie that are really, really cool and really, really strange. And I'm just very excited to watch it again. And also to hear whether you guys, and I can't promise you're going to like it. You know, one of you might hate it. I don't know, but it's worth a discussion in an episode in either case. So.
Well, Tony did not hold back with his objection to my pick, but I would submit that the call is for a Halloween-ish movie. Okay, so this does not necessarily mean a horror movie. I agree that some movies, there are horror movies that are Halloween-ish, and there are movies that are Halloween-ish that are not horror movies. For instance, if I recommend The Fly, okay, that's a horror movie, sure, or it has horror elements, you know, but does it feel Halloween-ish to you? No. And I would insist that Ed Wood is an absolutely Halloween-ish movie, if you just maybe not recall, but obviously there's some nods to horror, and obviously there's a kind of spooky fun house atmosphere to the whole thing. So I would submit that it is absolutely a Halloween movie, though I leave it up to Anthony to decide what he's in the mood for. And I haven't seen the other two movies. And as I said, I have a bit of a deficiency in the realm of horror movies, as perhaps my thick shows. So of course I'd be interested in watching them, but I just think, I had to go with something that I was truly excited about. So I had to pick Ed Wood. I'm sorry.
So, a lot of people talk about their first acid trip as something that they constantly are chasing after, in subsequent trips, right? They're trying to dose to get that feeling back. Same with a lot of different drugs, right? That's kind of how I felt. This is like a seminal moment for me in my exploration of horror, but it still holds up. I saw this film in the theater. I was 10 years old, but it still scares me to this day. I watched it probably last year, and it presents a take that doesn't involve a chainsaw. It doesn't involve, sure, there's there are tropes for sure, but I guess the mechanisms, there's not like gratuitous amounts of gore, right? There aren't these just quasi mythical monsters or any sort of, I don't know, it feels mostly modern. It feels kind of mimetic in that way, like this could actually happen, but there's some sort of realism. The camera it seems very grounded, but yeah, if you're, I think you'll be more scared than you, obviously Ed Wood, but than The Empty Man. I heard it, from what I've heard, it's more kind of like a thought piece than necessarily like, are we going to be scared? And do you want to be scared, Anthony? I challenge you to be scared. And I think, maybe this is like an opportunity for you to really, really see what true horror is all about, from the guy who produced House of Wax. Great movie. No, but yeah, this is one of my favorites. So this and The Changeling are my two favorites. So take with that what you will.
You will be scared by the quality of Johnny Depp's performance in Ed Wood.
All right. Interesting movies all around. The early years, the first decade and a half of Tim Burton just screams October and Halloween to me. Always does. I love Ed Wood. It's one of my favorites of him. When Martin Landau's Bela Lugosi does his whole home, I have no home speech, upsets a little something in my heart each time. It's a great movie. I almost nominated it last week, but I'm going to have to disqualify it this time because I would like to be the one to host that episode. It's purely selfish reason, although I'd love to hear Connor's take on it and thoughts on it. Okay. Tony, your movie, is it the type of horror movie you describe as unsettling and less than scary?
I think it's scary. I think it is more of kind of a mood piece. It is kind of an unsettling. Yeah, like unsettling is kind of the vibe I would describe it as.
All right. Interesting. I know nothing about it, so I can't judge it. I've never seen it. I've never seen Kirk's movie. Although I have a story, which was last week. Shay and I were walking down our neighborhood, and we just see a bunch of DVDs on the floor. And we see There Will Be Blood, actually. We see a few others. We see 13 Going on 30. And one of the other movies we see besides The Ring and Ring 2 is What Lies Beneath. So I have it on DVD. Be able to watch it in its true form, the way the director intended it, which is maybe kind of interesting. I love how Kirk picks these kind of middle like brow movies that don't really get made anymore. Harrison Ford, Michelle Pfeiffer, interesting duo. So it has that going for it. So I'm sort of torn because Tony, did you say your movie was kind of slow?
Yes. I'd
Slow
say it's on
burn.
the slower side. It's like 2 hours, 15 minutes, something like that.
Okay, Kirk's movie is also like 2 hours and 10 minutes, according to a quick Google search. This is a tough one. All right. Because we did Sphere recently, I'm going to go with Tony, if only because kind of has a Candyman, the myth, not the movie vibe. And I need something a little bit more horror,
Same movie,
something new.
Thank you for your trust, Anthony. I think it'll get a good discussion. I think you guys will all have things to say about it. I can't promise you'll all like it, but I do think it's a good Halloween pick for this year, and it's very different from Monkey Shines, which is good too.
All right. Well, I'll have what she's having.
Nintendo Direct was a trip today. It was quite something.
Well, what else did they say other than the Mario cast?
Well, they have a new Kirby game. It looks pretty sick. Fully 3D Kirby game coming out in spring. It's pretty wild.
What got announced? Mario?
What did they really? They didn't. They showed Bayonetta 3, which was long anticipated.
Some Kirby footage.
The Kirby was I think the only truly fresh announcement.
No Odyssey 2.
But mostly it was the Mario thing that I was obsessed with. I was completely taken aback.
All right, let's get Kirk's live reaction to the Mario cast. This is good content, guys. I want to hear
Mario cast for the new XCOM Mario game.
The cast of the Mario film, Kirk.
The animated film.
Oh.
So first of all, who do you think would play Mario? I want your guesses. Like, who do you think in our contemporary landscape is going to be Mario?
Ellen DeGeneres.
Not close. Very close.
Not bad, Kirk.
Mario Cuomo. Am I close?
Andrew Cuomo would be great. Oh my God! Imagine that as a second career.
My closer.
Mario Cuomo's the dad who's dead.
Yeah, the dead dad.
Yeah.
No, it's Chris Pratt.
For Mario.
Mario.
You have to watch the thing, Kirk. You have to watch the direct. Miyamoto comes on. They stop the whole thing. Like, yes, I would love to show you the new Mario movie, but I can't. I have nothing to show you right now, but I can tell you the cast. And then immediately it's like a headshot of Chris Pratt, and it's like Chris Pratt will be playing Mario. We are pleased to announce, America's most beloved funny man will be playing, or Nintendo's most beloved character. It's just very fun, and they go through the list. Anya Taylor-Joy as Peach.
I love that they picked Anya Taylor-Joy. It's like the one cool name they kind of got.
I know that was the kind of the cool name.
Internet fave, yeah.
Yeah.
Who's Luigi?
Charlie Day.
Charlie Day.
Oh my gosh.
And
even Michael Key as Toad.
Who's Bowser?
None other than Jack Black.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
That one I can live with.
Yeah.
No, it's
the
brilliant.
Other good one is Donkey Kong.
Yeah, I was gonna say you forgot Seth Rogen.
Seth Rogen
is Donkey Kong.
He'll show a humorous side of Donkey Kong,
Is it Donkey Kong from like a 2D or a 3D Donkey Kong?
I presume a 3-dimensional Donkey Kong will appear in this film, but
no, I mean, like, is it Donkey Kong Country or is it Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze? Because they're vastly different characters,
I agree, Kurt. Tropical Freeze Donkey Kong has a gritty edge that the earlier games lacked. And I hope
Well, Donkey Kong from the original Donkey Kong is actually Cranky Kong in Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah,
I don't know if you realize that. That's established lore.
I do know that.
Connor,
That is
Donkey
funny.
Kong Jr. is Donkey Kong.
oh, sorry. I was saying they need to make you a consultant on this movie or a co-writer. This is your perfect like job for
I have the lore Bible. Yeah.
It's kind of like how George R. R. Martin has one for, or he did for like Game of Thrones, the TV show, and his books. His super fan essentially like would tell him like, you can't do that chapter. Like it would defeat like all your continuity. So George R. R. Martin would be like, I got to throw this chapter out. It's apparently like actually slowed his writing process, but it's like essential to like
It's
keeping
almost
everything
like he-
straight.
nerd.
Yeah.
It's almost like he loads his book with a bunch of useless shit. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like you're reading a shitload of Skyrim books all at once.
No, but I guarantee you, Connor, that story would end poorly, and that you'd either be fired or quit in
Or be
disgust
attacked.
when they disregard your advice.
Yeah.
I would
All-
have to quit, like, for the sake of my integrity. Yeah.
Yeah. All the fans
Hollywood would be a mask.
all the fans would say though that like the genius parts of the movie are the parts that Connor consulted on. They're like, it's so
Yeah, yeah.
obvious where his touch is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we have the scene of where Cranky Kong, delves into his past, played by Fred Armisen, by the way. Cranky
Is Kristen
Kong,
Wiig in this somehow?
I don't
No.
think she is. I didn't see her on the
not
list.
announced, but it's a truly star-studded cast. They seem to be throwing in there's a lot of like obscure Mario characters in there. There's Kamek, there's the Magic Koopa, there's I'm sure you'll get a couple of Goombas in there with other famous roles, famous stars
Mario
attached.
Cuomo.
Like, yeah, I'm sure Andrew Cuomo will appear in this film.
What's the name
Honestly.
of the desert guys? Shit. The desert guys that move back and forth.
The
Desert
cactuses.
guys. Oh,
Yeah.
or like you're talking about the
Pokies.
Fremen from Dune, Kirk.
No, what's the name?
They're called Pokies, I think. Kurt.
Pokey, yes, Pokies.